Michael Ende is the writer of the novel, NeverEnding Story. Was a huge success in Germany and around the world.
Remember when one book convinced an entire generation that reading might actually save the world? Well, in 1984, German director Wolfgang Petersen took Michael Ende's, or we'll just call him Michael Ende's, fantasy novel, spent more money than anyone outside Hollywood ever had, and aimed the whole thing straight at children. Barret Oliver played Bastien, the lonely kid hiding in the school attic with a stolen book. Noah Hathaway played Atreyu, the boy warrior riding out to save a dying world. Tammy Stronach played the childlike Empress. Alan Oppenheimer voiced Falkor, Gmork, and the Rockbiter. And Gerald McRaney played the father who just wanted his son to keep his feet on the ground. And today we're going to count down 15 weird facts about the never-ending story. And stick around for number 1, because the name that Bastien screams out the attic window, the one that no one ever understood, well, it's had an answer sitting in the script the entire time. But before we start, be sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps YouTube show this to more retro movie fans just like you. Now, let's open the book, and I'll try to brush up on my German. Number 15, Noah Hathaway passed out face down in the Swamp of Sadness. Now, if you grew up in the 80s, there's a solid chance that the Swamps of Sadness got to you before middle school had ever shot. Artak sinking into the mud while Atreyu screams at him to keep fighting. That's the scene that ended childhoods. Filming it was worse. Trainers spent weeks coaxing the horse onto a hidden hydraulic lift that sank a little at a time, teaching him to stand there calmly, reportedly right up to his chin, while the swamp swallowed him. Hathaway says that the drowning scene alone took about 3 weeks to shoot. 3 weeks of one horse pretending to die. And let's kill the playground rumor for good. No horse drowned. Hathaway, a big animal guy with zero reason to cover for anybody, has said that 2 horses were used and neither was hurt.
We had 2 or 3 horses for this, and a great trainer from England.
They got hauled out between takes, blasted with big blowers, and warmed up. The horses were treated better than the kid. Nobody could put Hathaway in a wetsuit, so he just sat in the freezing muck until he went hypothermic, and the crew had to hit him with heaters. Then came a real close call. Shooting the moment that Falkor pulls Atreyu out, he went under. And with dry ice blanketing the swamp, there's no oxygen at mud level. He passed out face down in it. So crew had to dive in and clear the gunk out of his mouth. He said the groan that you hear in that scene, it isn't acting. That's a kid going out on camera. Number 14, Bastien's miserable hometown is actually Vancouver. Now, the movie never tells you what city Bastien lives in. It's deliberately nowhere. Just a gray, rainy, unnamed town where a kid gets thrown into a dumpster on his way to school. Well, that town, that's Vancouver. Fantasia was built on sound stages at Bavaria Studios outside of Munich, but every second of Bastien's real life was shot in British Columbia. The alley where the bullies corner him and dump him in the trash, that's Gastown's Blood Alley, with Trounce Alley right beside it, the oldest, grimiest corners of the neighborhood, which is exactly why they read so well as generic urban misery. Mr. Coriander's bookstore, that cluttered cave that made every kid want to be insulted by an old man and then handed a leather-bound book, well, that's a real place. It's McLeod's Books on West Pender, an antiquarian shop so perfectly crammed that the production barely had to dress it up. It's still there. You can walk in. And once you're looking, the city, it stops hiding. The Gastown steam clock is right there in the chase. Check the right side of the frame. That silvery dome floating in the skyline behind Bastion, that's BC Place Stadium, quietly ruining the mystique. His school is Queen Mary Elementary, over in Kitsilano. Fantasia was fake. The misery, that was Canadian. Number 13, Falkor was a 43-foot puppet run by a small village. Now, before dragons became a rendering problem, Falkor was a physical object taking up a genuinely alarming amount of floor space in a German warehouse. Over 43 feet of him, a frame of aircraft-grade steel, and more than 6,000 pearl-covered scales glued on one at a time by human beings who presumably went home each night and just stared at the ceiling. Then they buried the whole thing under about 200 pounds of pink Angora wool. Because again, somebody looked at this giant airborne predator and decided that, you know what it really needs? A sweater. Getting him built, that was the easy part though. Getting him to act, that nearly ended everyone. It took 18 puppeteers running in sync to operate one flying dog. One on the eyebrows, one on the tongue, others in the eyes, the mouth, the head, the body. You get it. Every input routed through control boards. And the whole crew holding its breath so a dragon could look slightly amused for 4 seconds. Petersen has put the number closer to 25, which either means the story's grown in 40 years or a couple guys were just standing there watching. Now, Falkor outlived all of it. He's still parked at Bavaria's Filmstadt in Munich, where grown adults line up to climb on his back and pretend to fly. The director's gone, the technology's gone, but the dragon? He's fine. Number 12, Fantasia's ageless ruler wore a denture at 10. The childlike Empress is an ageless immortal who has ruled Fantasia since before time meant anything. Tammy Stronach was 10, and right on schedule, her 2 front teeth fell out. That's bad timing for a being who doesn't age. So the production bought her a smile. For 2 weeks, she sat in a dentist's chair for hours at a stretch, mouth clamped open, while he sculpted a custom denture to fit over her real teeth. He said that she came out of those sessions with huge red lines pressed into the sides of her mouth. The denture was miserable. It gave her a lisp, and she has the definitive line about what that does to the most famous piece of dialogue in the movie, because Bastien, say my name, it just simply does not carry the same weight.
And that means right to us, and it means right into the eyes of Bastion. So it's a Bastion.
Now, she only wore it for one of her 2 scenes. By the second, it was shot about 2 months later, her real teeth had grown back in, thankfully, and Petersen landed on a cheaper fix. Just don't smile. Just a small lift of the lip, but nothing more. Generations of people describe the childlike Empress as mysterious, serene, unreadable, like she knew something that the rest of Fantasia didn't. But what she knew was that her teeth were missing. Number 11. Cinema's scariest void was a fish tank and a syringe. For a force defined by the total absence of everything, the nothing, well, it required an absurd amount of everything to build. And in 1984, it was a very large aquarium and a man with a syringe. The effects team used what's called a cloud tank, a glass tank layered with dense salt water on the bottom and fresh water floating on top, which creates an invisible horizon line where the two refuse to mix. Then they injected paint and ink right along that boundary. The colors couldn't sink and couldn't rise, so they just kind of bloomed sideways in a slow, curling, and genuinely unsettling billow. They shot it with high-speed cameras, and then they played it back slow. And a swirl the size of a fist became a storm front eating an entire continent. Then the optical printers layered that footage over the miniature landscapes until it looked like the sky itself was going to tear Fantasia apart. The real problem was never technical. It was more philosophical. Bryan Johnson's whole dilemma was that you can't photograph nothingness. You point a camera at nothing, and you just get an empty frame and a very confused audience. So the void, it needed a face. And the face they gave it was weather. Which is the trick, honestly. The scariest thing in the movie, it's not a monster, it's a storm that isn't carrying anything. It's made of paint in a tank in Munich. The only change was that they dropped liquid latex from the materials line. Everything else holds. Number 10, your version quietly lost 7 minutes of grief. Germany got a 101-minute movie. The rest of the planet got 94. So much for a never-ending story, right? Warner Brothers held the international rights, and Warner Brothers, well, they got out the scissors. 7 minutes, and not one big scene among them. Dozens of small trims, and the ones that land are all Bastien just being sad. In the German version, after his father walks out of the kitchen, the camera just stays there. Another 14 seconds of a boy slowly buttering his bread with his head in his hand, listening to the car pull away. Nothing happens. That's the whole point. You strip out enough of those and you don't lose plot, you just lose the grief. The kid stops being a boy whose mother died and just becomes a boy who's late for school. The openings tell you everything. The German cut starts with plain white text on black over Klaus Doldinger's gloomy score. No pop song anywhere in that version, because Le Mans' theme, it doesn't exist in it. Warner brought in Giorgio Moroder afterward to bolt synths onto the whole thing. So the international cut opens with swirling clouds and this soaring anthem, and you know within 9 seconds which kind of movie you're in. But Wolfgang Petersen said that he wanted it faster for foreign audiences, and asked his friend Steven Spielberg, who learned to cut from George Lucas, to help trim it. So they sped it up, and they took out the sadness. Number 9, Tammy Stronach walked away because fame got frightening. She was just 10 years old when filming and 11 when the movie exploded. And the world found her fast. This was decades before the internet made stalking convenient, and grown men still managed to track down her family's address in Northern California. They stood outside the house hoping to see her. The mail got worse. One man in Germany sent an 11-year-old girl an engagement ring. What? Stronach, again a child, felt guilty about it. Not scared, but guilty. She found someone traveling to Germany and actually had the ring returned because she didn't want to keep the man's money. She said since that she took all of it far too much to heart and wonders whether there was some way that she could have been less frightened by it. But there wasn't. Come on, she was 11. Then the industry showed up. Producers came to the family's house, and pitched her a film that required nudity. Her answer at 11 years old was that she was not going to do a nude film and she was not Lolita. Her parents were archaeologists. Stronach had been blunt about why they pulled her out. They simply weren't equipped to be managers, and the family was never in it for the money, and certainly not the fame. So they said no to the sequel, no to everything else, and they took her home. She moved to New York, she danced professionally for a couple of decades, started her own company, and then became a dance professor at Marymount, Manhattan. The Empress didn't vanish, she got out. Number 8. Michael Ende hated the movie so much that he tried to get his name off of it. Now, most novelists take the Hollywood check and then just go quietly. Well, Michael Ende took the check, watched the movie, and then started swinging. At a German press conference, he called it a revolting movie and a giant heap of kitsch, commerce, plush, and plastic. Then he accused the filmmakers of understanding nothing about his book and only caring about the money. That's not a bad review. That is an exorcism. So then he took it to court. He demanded, oh so Germanly, that they either halt the film or change its title. The producers didn't either, so he sued and then lost. The movie opened on schedule, same title, and his name still on it as the author. He fought to disown his own book, and the studio wouldn't let him. But his real problem was where the movie stops. Bastion shouts the Empress's new name. Fantasia is saved, everyone goes home, and that's roughly like the midpoint of the novel. In the book, Bastien goes into Fantasia himself. The Auron grants every wish that he makes and quietly takes one of his real memories in exchange. He gets powerful, he gets arrogant, and he tries to crown himself emperor, and he nearly erases who he was before he can claw his way back home. Ende wrote a story about grief and the danger of escaping into your own imagination too far. Petersen filmed the fun half and then bolted on the ending that Ende never wrote, where Bastion rides a luck dragon through the real world and then terrorizes his bullies. Ende died still hating it. And honestly, he had a point. All right, quick pause. If this trip back to Fantasia is doing something for you, hit that like button and subscribe to remember when. And let's try to settle an argument in the comments. What wrecked you worse as a kid? Artax in the swamp or the Gmork? For me, it's the horse. But all right, if a Star Wars connection is what you've been craving, sit tight. It's coming up in just a few. Number 7, there's a metal band named Atreyu, and nobody believes them. If you own any metalcore at all, Fantasia has been quietly sitting in your music library for like 30 years. The band formed in Orange County in 1999 under the name Retribution, right up until they discovered a band in Hemet had already claimed that, so they needed something else. And somebody in that room had clearly been emotionally destroyed by a boy on a horse in 1984, because they walked out with Atreyu. Which brings us to the running joke. After all these years, people still ask where the name came from, and frontman Brandon Saller has started having fun with it. He'll spin a straight-faced fake origin. Bassist Porter McKnight's bloodline supposedly traces back to Scottish kings. One of them, conveniently, is named Atreyu. People buy it, and then he admits, no, it's from the NeverEnding Story. Guitarist Travis Miguel says the reaction splits cleanly down the middle. Half the room hears the name and knows instantly, but the other half needs it spelled out loud, followed by the entire backstory. At which point, a working hardcore band ends up explaining the swamps of sadness to a stranger. So somewhere out there, a Fantasian warrior is selling out venues and playing festivals. I, for one, I like their song Becoming the Bull during my workouts. But anyways, Michael Ende, he hated the merchandising, and somehow this feels like the one that he would have hated the most. Number 6, Chewbacca is sitting in the Ivory Tower. Now, the Ivory Tower Council scene is wall-to-wall creatures, hundreds of them. Every corner of Fantasia summoned to hear that the world is ending. A few of them are extremely far from home. Standing in that crowd, waiting for news about the Nothing, are unmistakable lookalikes of Chewbacca, C-3PO, Yoda, a couple of Ewoks, E.T., Mickey Mouse, and, for reasons known only to God, Gumby. Yeah, so you had a Wookiee, among others, attending a fantasy summit that they had absolutely no business attending. But look, this wasn't Bavaria's puppet shop having a laugh. Industrial Light and Magic did the matte painting work on this film. And ILM's supervising matte photographer, Craig Barron, had talked openly about Star Wars characters getting quietly slipped into the shot. Now sit with that. George Lucas's own effects house was subcontracting on a German fantasy movie, painting a crowd of monsters for somebody else's director, and deciding to smuggle a couple of its own into the frame. That's not an homage, that's like tagging a building. Now, one of the Baron's assistants on that job, incidentally, was a kid named David Fincher. They kept it subtle enough that on a worn VHS tape playing on a tube TV, nobody stood a chance. But all it took were better screens and a pause button so people could start catching a Wookiee in Fantasia. 40 years on, nobody at ILM has ever been fired from it, which means they got away with it. Number 5, Brian Johnson had no love for the kid playing Atreyu. Decades later, somebody asked effects supervisor Brian Johnson about working with child actors, and Johnson did not reach for diplomacy. Barret Oliver, who played Bastien, was an absolute gem. He delivered every single time. He was the best thing ever. But then Johnson added with real bewilderment that the kid just vanished afterward, and he never found out what became of him. Well, for the record, Oliver did Cocoon and Daryl, and then quietly walked away from acting and became a photographer obsessed with 19th century printing. He's fine. He literally wrote the book on a Victorian photo process that almost nobody else remembers. Tammy Stronach got a shrug, but she was fine. Then Johnson arrived at Noah Hathaway, and the verdict was that the boy was, frankly, a bit of a pain in the ass, and Wolfgang Petersen could barely get anything out of him. Hathaway's side is better. The two of them fought constantly over how to play Atreyu, because Petersen wanted volume, and Hathaway, just a 12-year-old whose acting heroes were Brandon and James Dean, wanted stillness. He kept telling the director that there's real depth available here. It's a 12-year-old, by the way, but Petersen went and just laid in the screaming anyway. That is an outrageous position for a child to take against the man who reportedly demanded 40 takes of a single shot and then dragged the shoot out nearly a full year. So, sure, difficult kid, but also the kid who broke 2 vertebrae when a horse came down on him before filming even started, and then spent 2 months in traction before shooting a single frame. He still carries that back damage today. A pain in the ass? Yeah, it feels like a rough grade for that. Number 4, those giant stone sphinxes, they're barely waist high. Those colossal stone sphinxes at the Southern Oracle, the ones with the laser eyes that stop Atreyu cold, well, they're on display today at Bavaria Filmstadt. Tourists walk up expecting monuments and find 2 statues they could comfortably lose an argument with. They're small, and they've always been small. The film ran roughly 300 blue screen shots stacked with matte paintings, motion control, and ILM's InstaVista cameras, a combination that cinematographer Jost Vacano said that nobody in the industry had ever piled up in those quantities. When he needed light beams with real punch on the ruin set, well, studio lamps couldn't do it, so he brought in high-intensity aircraft landing lights. Then, the lighting started fighting back. Illuminating a 100-foot blue screen took so many lamps that the heat became a hazard, and Vacano has written about watching an expensive, painstakingly built ivory tower model simply melt in front of them. Mid-take, weeks of work gone while the camera was rolling. The rockbiter got shot at 75 to 100 frames per second, so the crumbs falling from his mouth would seem to drop a great distance, which meant that the 6 operators running his face had to perform every single line 3 to 4 times faster than normal to sync at projection speed. Vacano, he called it a miracle. It was 6 grown men chipmunking a monologue about hands. And when the nothing rips the world apart and Atreyu ends up clinging sideways to a tree, they didn't fake it. They rotated the entire set vertical. Number 3. Riding Falkor was basically riding a mechanical bull. Falkor is like a big flying pillow with a friendly face and a voice like your favorite uncle. That's the whole pitch. The kid who actually had to sit on him, though, got a rougher version. Those gorgeous pearl scales were hard plastic, and comfortable, they were not. But the scales were the least of it. Falkor's head and neck, around 12 feet of it, ran on a forklift motor, and that motor had a temper. It overheat, buck, and pitch the star of the movie clean off the dragon, the friendliest creature in the film, and riding it was closer to a rodeo than a flight. So the crew bolted on a hidden grip for him to grab, and gave it a name. 2 words. The first is O, and the second, well, it's something that I'm not supposed to say on this channel, though anyone who's ever been launched off something without warning, you can already probably guess. So he needed it, because the drop to the studio floor, that was 15 feet. So here's what gets me. Hathaway remembers the flying as the fun part. 12 feet of dragon, head on an overheating forklift, you had a panic handle, a 15-foot drop, and that's the stuff that he enjoyed, which tells you plenty about everything else that they put him through. Every kid in the 80s wanted to ride that dragon, but the one kid who actually got to needed a panic handle just to stay on. Number 2, it was the most expensive movie that Germany had ever made. The budget came in somewhere between $25 and $27 million. That's roughly 60 million Deutschmarks, and north of 80 million in today's money. That today is the most expensive film ever produced in Germany, and by most counts, the most expensive made anywhere outside of the United States or the Soviet Union. The record it broke belonged to Wolfgang Petersen for Das Boot. The man's only real competition was himself. Now, this isn't some scrappy European outfit going it alone. American money did help fund it. ILM handed the mat work, and Warner Brothers put it in American theaters. Transatlantic operation, German address. And the money is right there on the screen, because everything in Fantasia had to physically exist. Around 200 specialists at Bavaria Studios built one of the largest blue screen stages then in use. Over 30 feet by 100, plus an indoor swamp that was functionally a swimming pool full of mud. The ivory tower vista is a painting, a real painting photographed. They also shot the whole thing in English with a largely American cast, which was a cold-blooded export strategy dressed up as casting. But it worked. Petersen became a director Hollywood wanted, though not overnight, since his first American movie, Enemy Mine, landed with a thud. It took until In the Line of Fire in 1993 for him to arrive properly. And from there came Outbreak, Air Force One, Perfect Storm, and Troy. All of it built on a flying dog. And number one, German kids, they never had to guess what Bastien yelled. All right, admit it. You've watched this movie a dozen times, and you've never once been certain what Bastien screams out that attic window while the storm tears the school apart. Neither has anyone else, or at least not many people. You got like 40 years of guessing, and the field includes like Monana, Moriara, blah, 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 who knows. A lot of people have quietly decided that it's probably fine just not to know. Well, it's Moonchild. That's it. It's right there in the shooting script. And it comes straight out of Ende's novel, where the name that Bastien gives her is Mondenkind, German for exactly that. There's a lovely fan theory that Petersen mumbled it on purpose, so every kid in the audience could imagine their own secret name for her. It's a beautiful idea, but it has one fatal flaw, which is that in the German language version, supervised by the same German director and the same German producers, well, Bastien bellows Mondenkind, clear as a church bell. So an artistic choice, it doesn't evaporate on the trip home. So what we've got here isn't necessarily poetry, it's a sound mix. The score swells, the wind machine roars still, and the most important word in the movie, it gets buried underneath both of them. And an entire generation walks out into the parking lot arguing. And there you have it, everyone. 15 weird and wild facts about the never-ending story. Which one got you? Well, let us know in the comments, hit subscribe, and send this to the friend who still can't talk about Artax. I even had a hard time getting through this one. Until next time, everyone, this is Remember When.